Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde. I'm Gregory Oh, and I'm here to welcome you to NYO Canada Replay. Back in 2016, we reached out to Michael Grey Eyes and Brittany Ryan at Signal Theatre for help in creating a special project for Canada 150. We wanted to create something that not only celebrated the sesquicentennial, but also acknowledged the pain and injustice of Canada's colonial history. Signal introduced us to the fearless work of Zacchaeus Jackson, a poet and performer from the Piikani First Nation who spoke truth to power and died too young at the age of 36. We spent a year building relationships, putting it together. The result was the Unsilent Project. It became the centerpiece for our Edges of Canada tour in 2017. I'm joined today by two of the artists who created music for the project, Juliette Palmer and Ian Cusson. They're both wonderful, inspiring. They're not only composers, but musicians, collaborators, and activists, and people who have thought a lot about the future of our art form. Welcome, Ian and Juliette.
Well, thank you for this. My name's Ian Cusson. I am, like you said, a composer, and I am originally from a small community called Midland Penetanguishene. It's a rich, vibrant community on the Georgian Bay waterways, and my family's ancestry is Métis and French Canadian. So I'm mixed settler and Indigenous. And yeah, I'm excited to chat about this. It's great to reflect back on our time with NYO a few seasons back, and to think about the kinds of work we made then and the kinds of work we're making now. So happy to be here.
So I'm Juliette Palmer. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Slightly wish I were there right now, but that's okay. I'm here. So I'm in Toronto. I've lived in Toronto since 1998. I am a composer. I perform. I work with artists across disciplines. I do some community engaged work with my company, Urban Vessel. Yeah, and I'm also the president of the Canadian New Music Network. And in fact, we have a series coming up in the fall on decolonization. So this is, it's obviously of the moment, but I'm really excited to see how these conversations keep moving forward. And this is something that obviously we're wrestling with in the Unsilent Project with NYO. So thanks, Greg, for inviting us to be here today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you. But we'll start simple. I just thought I would ask you both, you are both composer performers, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about the things that led you to where you are and what made things easier for you and what made things difficult for you.
Juliette?
Okay, yeah, right. Well, I mean, I started as a performer, and that's just music is part of my family life. My mother, my aunt, my grandmother, my uncle, all play music. And so I was a pianist and a clarinetist, and I ended up going to study the clarinet actually at university. And it was composing that really got me through my world had suddenly become very narrow and just playing music. So composing was a creative outlet, and so that's sort of the thing that made life easier for me was to keep being creative through making music. And in hindsight, I had created music before. I just didn't know that I didn't call it composing. And actually now I'm getting to a point in my career where and I think in our milieu where we are questioning this idea of who gets to call themselves a composer. And there's a lot of power tied up in that. Like composers get to write for orchestras. Musicians don't usually get to do that. For me, making music with other people and making things happen creatively is life sustaining. It's just about being alive.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying, and yeah, my musical journey also came from a family of well, in terms of extended family, having musicians. My parents are not musicians at all, and found musical exploration as a young person as a very natural fit and a natural outlet. Also, like Juliet said, I was similar in that I was making music before I knew that it was, composition itself. But I have an interesting journey in that I followed a path. I was very interested in performance and left high school to become a pianist, whatever that meant. Did a lot of composing before that and even during that time. But abandoned that practice about a year in and studied other things like languages and literature and then went on to have a family and to work jobs that were unrelated to music. So my training, I have no formal composition training. I studied privately with some teachers, Sam Dolan, Jake Heggie, a few other people along the way. But it was a very kind of pieced together, non-traditional path. And like Juliet, I would say, I don't like this idea of interrogating the term composer. I think is really important. I would say I'm a composer because I compose music and people understand what that is, but I would more classify it personally, internally, as being a maker. I feel like my disposition is to make things. I love making. And frankly, it could be, I love working with my hands. I built a dollhouse. I love meticulous, detailed things. I love, I love the idea of putting clothing together. I'm not a fashion designer by any means, but I get very excited by people who make. And so I think that's how I would describe what I do musically, is just, it's a making and it feels very natural to do. But I would extend that to, I could see myself making in a lot of ways in my life, one of which is through music.
I'll tie that back to you, Juliet, and just mention, when I was thinking about your music and my memories of seeing a lot of it performed, there's often a really strong visual element that stays in my memory as well. I have these really strong memories of like from Stitch, in that's based on, I think it was in Ossington. Sort of it looked kind of factory spacey. The piece at the Harrison Baths and all of these crazy visual images and the pools and the showers and Yvonne Ng, I think, like all squished up in a box and everything. Have you always associated or do you even think of your music in a visual way?
Yeah, so it would be very difficult for me not to kind of, I don't know, imagine with all my senses. Like that would feel strange to me. So yes, it's, I have notebooks full of images and sounds and little sketches for bringing something into being. And so it's not, it's just how my imagination works. And so, like when I was in New Zealand and I did my master's and, was creating work, I was doing all those things. So I was making the video and I was moving and working with text and sound. And then as I went along, and I kept doing that actually through my studies in the States. I was like with my turntable and my effects and with a video behind me and was squeezing grapefruit, whatever, just doing all these things. And then I think I started wondering, well, I don't have to do all those things. Maybe I should invite some people into this space and we can create together, and maybe that will be stronger, or at least it'll be different. And I think the work could benefit from that creative input and perspective of other artists.
And for either of you, do you have any quick advice, like how, if you're a young composer or musician or some hybrid of the either, or just a maker, as Ian was saying, what are some tips for connecting with people and making these relationships happen?
Be tenacious and be curious. I think one thing that's really important is, especially when you're trying to build into or get into a network of composers, sometimes they can feel very impenetrable communities, and that may not be by intention, but it can feel that way when you're trying to sort of meet folks. I think approaching people by curiosity about them is always a very positive way into building relationships. So, if you reach out to a composer and say, "Hey, can I sit down with you for coffee?" Rather than saying, "Can I pitch something to you and tell you all of my wonderful ideas?" I spent a lot of those meetings and times asking them lots of questions about themselves and what they were interested in. Having a curiosity and an open disposition to people and to communities is an excellent way.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, to sum it up, listen with curiosity. I mean, listen to the world around you, what matters to people, and listen to those other people. Yeah, because I think there's nothing more off-putting than someone coming at you with their stuff. Like, that's not how you form any kind of friendship in any sense. Like, it really has to be a mutual listening. Yeah.
I'm just going to jump to recent news. Ian, I just wanted to, if you wanted to talk about it, you are going to Banff now. Can you explain what you're doing there?
So there's a program at Banff that has run, it's run under different names, but an opera program, I think since 1949, believe it or not. And it's changed over the years in terms of its focus and its needs. Most recently, it was sort of rebranded as Opera in the 21st Century. And so I was invited with the wonderful Karen Slack, who is a Black opera singer from the States, to be co-directors of the program for this coming season. So this year because everything kind of was closed down with the pandemic, they were still going to run this program in 2021. And there was a moment of pause, I think, at the Banff Center and with the planners and organizers of that program to really ask questions about where are we right now, who is in opera, how are opera companies, for example, structured, and what does it mean to really be an opera maker? And by that I would include, administrators, directors, designers, composers, librettists, singers, répétiteurs, etc., orchestral musicians in the 21st century, and what, and particularly who hasn't been a part of that world and that conversation.
That's great. Juliette, I'm gonna ask you about Urban Vessel, your created company, and I was really taken with a lot of the images that you were posting from like the beach and beach waste and things with Jermaine. Did you want to talk about that or other projects that you might be working on?
Sure. Yeah, so I founded Urban Vessel in 2006 with my friend Christy Pearson, who's an architect and interdisciplinary artist. That was a collective. And so we were really a bunch of artists across disciplines that were creating work inspired by bigger ideas. So politics, fetishists, public hygiene, the environment, all sorts of things. And so created a series of works. Now it's it's a nonprofit, and I'm the artistic director for the last 8 years. And yeah, we've kept that idea going of a sort of a horizontal creative structure and the team that I take the lead on things, but I gather a team and then we work together in a collective way to create these pieces, which really, they're just each are unique. So you were mentioning plastic on the beach. So that's actually been a kind of bit of a through line of works that connect with water.
I would like to share a clip of a video that you made and also created the soundtrack for, Immersed. Did you want to just talk about that? Because I think that's part of the Homing Project. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. The Homing Project began with the playwright and writer Phelan Johnson, who's from Six Nations. She's Mohawk and Tuscarora. And then there was choreographer Aria Evans and ceramicist Parker Dirks. So the four of us, we were meant to be doing all these workshops at the Brickworks, and that wasn't happening. And so we decided to offer each other creative prompts during, this was like
Oh,
early
great.
on in the lockdown. So yeah, and then you might respond to someone else's work and create something else. So there is on Urban Vessel's YouTube channel, there's a series of these videos that you can look at, which, you know, and my one is in there. So my one is called Immersed, and that, yeah, just comes from my relationship with the lake and with water. And so I found it really, really healing and yeah, just lifted my spirits to be in the lake.
Ian, and Juliet, you were talking about how opera is like a collaborative effort. It's like many people working together. Is it ever so? As Juliet was making a film, and people are starting to really try to think outside the box and work outside of the box. Is it ever strange or difficult when other people, for lack of a better turn of phrase, intrude upon your territory? Like when they start to either write music or talk about what you should be writing, is it ever hard to cede that control?
The nature of collaboration is a frightening one to me, actually, just conceptually. But when I've had experiences like, for example, an opera piece that I just made, you know, it was a team that was a safe team. It was a team that was an encouraging and supportive team. It was one where I felt very trusting of them. And so their suggestions and offers and interjections were you know, sometimes hard, but always to make the work a stronger thing. And so yeah, if I was to co-write a piece of music with another composer, again, we're using composer lightly, that might be a strange thing. I think that would feel from this vantage as a scary endeavor. But to have other artists bringing other viewpoints, even just reflective, like that wasn't clear, that was why this, or I think this is needed here. Those kind of offers and suggestions when it's in a safe community are wonderful. And that kind of collaboration I love. But I look at Juliet and I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you do these things? How do you do these projects? I'd freak out.
Sometimes I do freak out. You know, it took me a while to recover from singing River because that was just so massive. Like there were like 300 community participants. Like we did all these workshops, and I think there were like 30 or 40 artists contributing to it. Yeah, I think I took a little rest after that.
And yet you persevered through it and you made something really special and unique. And that's the key thing. Yeah.
Well, and it wasn't about me.
Yeah.
You know, it was about loving this river. You know, I wanted people to come to this river valley and go, wow, I hadn't thought of the river like this. It's so beautiful. And, you know, and then my larger view is motivating me, is propelling me to do all this work and to stress out in the middle of the night. Because I'm like, what if people really love the river? Maybe they'd take care of it. Maybe the world would be a better place. You know, that I laugh, but that is my, you know, I have a deeper motivation to make these works. Yeah.
So, Ian, we're going to listen to a short excerpt of one of your one of your recent pieces, sorry. And did you want to just set that up for us?
Sure. This piece is called The Garden of Earthly Delights. I wrote it during the beginning of the pandemic. It's a piece that was commissioned by Duo Concertante, and it was intended to be part of a chapter, one of those new chapter grants, to create a project called the Ecology of Being, wherein they commissioned a few works from a number of different composers, from different perspectives, different musical styles, to reflect on the state of the world and the ecological impacts of climate change, of human activity, that these kinds of questions. And so this is a 10-minute work for violin and piano. I grabbed this old painting by Hieronymus Bosch as a place of inspiration, or as a kind of focusing point to my thinking. If you've ever seen the Bosch work, it's this hyper detailed triptych where you could almost take a magnifying glass and study the sections of this painting. He's known for his wild, grotesque, certainly, images. And I just have such a resonance with Bosch's work. It's actually, this piece is the first in a triptych of pieces that I've been writing. One that I just finished is an oboe sonata. That's the second in the triptych. And the third will be a string trio work that I'll write in coming months.
We all met or worked on the Unsilent Project with NYO Canada back, I think it was 2016. We started in 2016, and I think the tour was in 2017. Am I right in my dates?
Is it, or was it 2018?
No, it was 2017.
Yes.
Yeah,
Really?
totally
Wow.
right.
It seems like it was a long time ago. Maybe because 2020 has seemed very, very long. But, back then it was part of the Canada 150 celebrations. And there were criticisms of the whole Canada 150 brand that, it should be called Canada 12,000, for example, in recognition of the First Nations of Canada.
Celebration or
Yes.
commemoration?
Absolutely. Celebrating the colonization of Canada. So for many people, it was very painful. And that also it was going to be like a one-hit wonder, that we would take this time and then Canada 151, we wouldn't think about the things that we were thinking about, so I guess I don't know what the question is were those criticisms valid, or did good things come out of it? And tacking on to what Juliette had alluded to previously, what is the concept of decolonization as it applies to Western classical music?
It's strong and alive, I guess.
But it's deeply rooted historically as well. Like, for me, the timing that really speaks to it for me is that post-war building of a cultural structure around funding and orchestras and all of that was happening at the same time that Indigenous cultural practices were still being suppressed, like were illegal, and that's profound. Like, that's just painful.
Yeah. I had a conversation just yesterday with a friend who's not Indigenous, a Black friend and collaborator on a project, who is still like, I don't want to make work in those kind of spaces, and those kind of spaces being major institutions in Canada, because they are white spaces. And by white, they don't mean that there aren't, maybe some folks working there that aren't white, but rather they're sort of colonially structured. And and this person's comment was, let them do the work that they need to do. And then then I can consider coming into that space to make work. I think what we were trying to do in 2017 was to say, and some of us are still trying to do this, to say, we're just going into these organizations and we're going to take over and just make it what it needs to be. And that work, it takes a lot of kind of internal, like girding of one's loins to say, I can do this. And it's usually going like, oh gosh, this is going to be a disaster. This is going to be, no, push that voice down. We're going to do this. And you're kind of putting on a facade of like, we can do this, but it actually can come with a lot of pain, because you go into a space that doesn't always want you to be there and doesn't want your story or stories to be there. And so you're kind of thinking, let's take it for the team to change these organizations, but you don't do it without cost to yourself, to your community, that kind of thing. That's a long-winded answer to say it was exciting that these projects were happening, but they revealed the core structural challenge, which is that these organizations are set up in a certain way, and bringing anybody who works in any paradigm that's separate from that or doesn't feel included in that is a very, very vulnerable thing for those communities.
The bigger the institution, the more challenging that is to engage and to engage with a different perspective, with an Indigenous perspective or Black perspective, and to shift. Like that it's just really difficult. Yeah. And I have been reading, and it didn't come out this year, but it came out before. I can't remember whether it was 2018, but it's Resounding the Orchestra, which looks at relationships between Canadian orchestras, Indigenous peoples, and people of color. This is a wonderful research paper by Soraya Pirbay and Pamela Atariwala. And it's so great. Like there are interviews with people from many of these orchestras who have the best of intentions, but the structure that they are bound by kind of just obstructs change.
And even just like from a practical perspective, right? Like, an orchestra, if we just take an orchestra, right? It's this hierarchical structure, and there are administrators, and of course there are board members, but then there's a conductor who is, and if you think about it, there's a very beautiful image of the orchestra. It's like an organism. It's like a body that has a brain and muscles and fibers and tissues, and it all works together ideally to make a unified thing. But I guess to say, hey, could we have opportunities, like watching Juliette's piece, for example, places of improvisation, watching how she structured that through her score in terms of the Unsilent Project piece that she wrote. And then getting a group of even young, malleable young people to try something completely outside of their very structured, rigorous, clear training. And then to have a conductor lead that. It's like brains are exploding all over the place.
Ian, you talked about the work that Indigenous Black people of color need to do when they enter these organizations. And I think that's, just going to emphasize it again, that so many people are not really aware of the emotional toll it takes, or just the amount of labor it requires to go into these systems and ask to be on stage to listen, or, to present differing viewpoints. And I'd like to give a shout out to Michael Greyeyes and Phelan Johnson. And I'll give a quick shout out for Phelan Johnson's podcast, Secret Life of Canada, because that's incredible. But, I think they were a huge part of the successes that the Unsilent Project had, because Michael was really able to come in and help us find better ways of doing things. I'm going to say that I was really proud of the Unsilent Project, what we were able to achieve, because it was a new way of working for the orchestra, and we had really great collaborators in Michael and Phelan, in Brittany Ryan, and the family of Zacchaeus Jackson, and then the artists that came along to join us, and that's a tremendous amount of labor that they put in to help us put this together. And so Juliette comes and brings this work Invicta, and brings two rapper or spoken word artists. What was it like, Juliette? What did you find in terms of initial reactions and working with the orchestra, and especially coming from you used to play in a youth orchestra, so.
Yeah, I mean, the joy of working with the youth orchestra is that their minds are not totally made up yet. Like, they're still open, and there's more time. Like, we had so much more time to make this piece. Like, we couldn't have done this with a professional orchestra, like in 2020 or 2018 or whatever. Maybe in the 60s you could have done something. There's more time, but yeah. So I love their open-heartedness, that they were willing to engage with this work, and then to work with Lindsay
Equal
Knight, and Zoe Priceless Roy, and played around with the rhythm and the text, and that sort of was woven into how the orchestra related to them and related to each other. So I thought of it as I'm orchestrating this fabulous poem, and this really powerful poem that's a critique of the colonization of Canada, and I felt very strongly motivated. This is a poem that people need to hear.
I would just add the fact that Zacchaeus Jackson's family was involved in the project, and gave their blessing and gave their perspective, and in some ways were they were willing participants in the creation of it, and even collecting the artists. Brendan was another person in the project who had known, and these people were friends of his. So it felt like very much like a family supported project. And that's, I think that is a really critical piece, and an example of how these kinds of collaborative cross-cultural works need to happen. It's with consultation, it's with approval. The worst thing is to take, I am going to create this thing. I won't talk to any of those people. I won't get to know any of those people. I won't ask their perspective or opinion, but I'll just do. And that did not happen in this project. And that is extremely commendable.
So let's just take a minute to listen to Zacchaeus Jackson himself reading Invicta.
Yeah.
And I would call all the world's water traitor, for the way her body brought the traitors of fur, of flesh, of Black Hills gold, holding butterfly nets wove of heartstrings so cold they were able to freeze and then capture my nation's breezes. Kidnap the Blackfoot Nappy, whitewash replaced with a half-scalped war-painted Jesus, a strangled slit-throat Caesar, so unable to say et tu brute, he simply mouthed the letters O and K. And as today's stray bullets pull stars from the sky through bubble-wrapped newborn darkness, I see that midnight is them and the noon is me. But now bright minds' lights have ruined the moon like the whites ruined wounded knee. They pruned our freedom, clip snip, quick flip, bonsai treat 'em. And now we are needed like weeds in the Garden of Eden. But me, I ain't never seen a field of dandelions trying to grow into roses. God knows Columbus needed no Moses to split the sea of my red people. He knew enough to just trust in the strength of the steeple, the breadth and length of cathedrals, God's gospel-glossed needles, force-feeding Kanata's pre-bleeding crimson Indian summer evenings, leaving me grieving that even as we speak our spoken words, these thieves are still weaving history through tree trunks, searching for reasons to clear-cut the psyche. I think we all know that if Mikey didn't like his bowl of life, life, they would have let him starve. And still we wonder at the marvels of our carven nation, Segra, Degra, congregation. And still the throngs they hasten to sing songs of race and reformation, once sung by the lungs of long dead masons. So if here's the place and now's the time, you run your race while I fast and pray for mine, and hunger for the day when I can release the images of my people, proud and free from the collective walls of imagination. But right now, North America's just a fucked up fancy restaurant, and I'm looking forward to the day when I can't get a reservation.
Juliet, you once said he was a poet who saw injustice in the world around him and called it out with energy and brilliance. And I really like that. That, you know, he ended up dropping F-bombs in Kerner Hall. And I'll just mention that it was Michael Grey Eyes who brought the name Zacchaeus Jackson into the room. And, you know, he talked about when Count Basie met Duke Ellington and how, you know, they got together on this fateful night and created music together and the wonderful things that came out of it. And I wanted to talk about that image because it wasn't exactly like Count Basie and Duke Ellington, because it was the National Youth Orchestra and Zacchaeus Jackson and, you know, Priceless and Equal and Phelan and Ian and yourself, Juliet, and Brendan and Isidra, so many people that were involved. What was that like? Do you remember, Ian, from your perspective? Like, was it rough, or was it like, did it really work well?
You know, it was a challenge. It was a good challenge, and I think it was one that I don't think any of the artists involved walked away from that project the same. And I think that is a good thing. You know, we all came together, and it was messy, and it was beautiful, and it was like we cried, and we made like crazy works together, and I think what we did, and what was maybe most important, and what became clear as we were going along doing this process meeting, even talking about it, was we were trying to honor this incredible artist that we lost too soon, and his voice, and the power of his voice, and the power of his language and words, and create something that was like I don't want to say an offering, but like an honoring of him. And I think the creation of that and the doing of that is worth all the good challenge and trial of it. Maybe that makes I'm making it sound very negative. It wasn't. But I think, just as Juliet said already, that the challenges of bringing a particular institution and structure of the orchestra together with artists that don't normally work in that place, where there's a kind of mutual skepticism of the other, together, it's a messy thing. But actually, we became friends through it all, and the youth in the orchestra were changed. Some were like undone by this process, and they had practiced considering the land that they were on and the land that they came from across Canada. And I don't think any of them left unchanged either. And so a success it was.
And how was it for you, Juliet? Do you have any memories or like positive, negative experiences that you wanted to talk about?
I just felt really fortunate to have been part of this process and to have encountered Zacchaeus's work. Like, I didn't know about his work, so I'm super grateful to Michael Grey Eyes for bringing this brilliant, insightful, challenging voice into the center of the project. And like, that was so motivating because, yeah, he's just brilliant and fearless, and it gets tragic that he's not still around to work with youth, because he was doing great work with youth through creative writing workshops. So that's really sad. But I just felt like it was an honor to be able to lend my skills to this project.
I just wanted to ask you in closing, I mean, there's so much we could talk about, and this has been amazing, but when you envision the orchestra of 30 years from now, if there is an orchestra, I mean, there are doomsayers and naysayers, and maybe there doesn't need to be an orchestra, but what would you, if you could change something or if you had hopes for it, what are some, like, do you have an idea about it that you could venture forth? Just, I didn't prepare you for this question, but like, especially as we're thinking, in the wake of Black Lives Matter and, lots of things like COVID and climate change, but how would you, how can we change the orchestra, or how should we change the orchestra?
Ooh, I'm excited. Can I jump in? I'm so excited.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. I can see fewer orchestras that are kind of like the proper orchestra of today. And I see we've got a lot, like in Canada, we have a lot of regional orchestras. And I feel like if they can just be supported to do the work that they are, some of them are already doing, but to become more grassroots and to really have governance that reflects the community they're in. So, if they've got Indigenous elders who really have a say on the board, and they've got like representation from the community, and so that there's a more of a porous relationship between the musicians and the people who live there, and there's a lot of co-creation that's going on together, so that it's kind of it's like I don't know, it's a circle that is creating together. I feel like it could be a really amazing vessel for creativity and for community engaged creativity. Ha! That's 30 years from now.
I would add to that, I'd love to see greater diversity in terms of the programming, more works by women, more works by non-traditional folks that are represented on programs, or organizations led and run by people that are diverse. So that is one, but I'd also love the spaces that we perform in to be inviting to people that don't feel currently in 2020 that they are welcome in that space, that feel they're often described as very white spaces, right? So how does that person come into even a beautiful space? I mean, I don't think we should deconstruct all of the spaces. There are some gorgeous concert halls, but how is it that all people from differing communities, from different socioeconomic distribution, feel welcome and invited and comfortable in those spaces? If we could see that in 30 years, that would be brilliant.
That's so great. So we are going to listen to A Child's Bright Eyes by Ian Cusson, played by the National Youth Orchestra. And then we will hear Invicta by Juliette Kiri Palmer, with special guests Zoe Priceless-Roy and Lindsay Equal Knight, conducted by Jonathan Darlington. And before we listen, normally in this interview, we wouldn't have spent so much time talking about really important things. And we would talk about the piece and how it was written. And so I'm just going to take a pop culture reference, and if we were like Marie Kondoing everything you were going to say, what is one thing about your piece? Maybe we'll start with Ian and talk with Juliette, that really sparked joy in you, like as the creator of this work, in so far as you created what you did. What is something about, like, when we're listening to them that, for you really sparks joy?
Because this is such a huge orchestra that was at our disposal. And I think both Juliette and I chose to not even use the full contingent of what was available, which is like quadruple winds. It's like bigger than, it's like Wagner size orchestra or Strauss, right? It's huge. But one of the fun things in my piece that I loved playing with was these kaleidoscopic moments that are like, it's just a dense mass of sound, which is something that you can get in different ways, but you can especially get when you've got so many people on stage. And then the moments that are literally completely opposite to that, which are just low piccolo doubled with, I think it's like a muted trombone or something, and like a string kind of like pad underneath it. just those make me happy.
I think sparking joy. I love it when I hear Zoe and Lindsay with their fierce voices, and then the orchestra taking on their words with sound. Like I love that. Then the energy spills over into the orchestra. That gives me a buzz, and I like that they drop the F-bomb as well.
Well, thanks so much, guys. Thanks also to Lillian Ross Millard, who is the video artist who will be putting this interview together with my many false starts and hems and haws. And so let's listen to Jonathan Darlington and the National Youth Orchestra of Canada playing two pieces from the Unsilent Project.
Giving It to You by Zacchaeus Jackson. Found the fire and desire, but lost it in the truth. Made the most of what I never knew by giving it to you. I wear this crown of broken thorns to lead me to my fate. Haunted, twisted, nevermore. Salvation came too late. And now the sky is burning, and I'm giving it to you. Take this gift of madness and decreate something new. Dancing in the moonlight while the stars fade out above. If I'd never learned to hate, I'd never learn to love. Rainbows in the shattered sky, green and red and blue. I wish I knew the reason why I'm giving this to you. Because now the sky is burning, and I'm giving it to you. Take this gift of sadness and unmake something new. The crooked scars that never mend, the lie you never spoke. You swallowed nothing constantly. It's on nothing that you choke. Pretend to act like something else to make your life untrue. You never knew just what you knew, so I'm giving it to you. Words you never understood and never really learned. Screams you whispered in the dark while you watched the world burn. I can't give you apathy, but that's not something new. I guess I can take this lie. Instead, I'm giving it to you.
I want to tell you that you've had your voice all along, the beat of your heart and the rhythm of your song. Your song, your story belongs to your tongue. We've been hidden in silence, but we've never been gone. I want to tell you, you're not voiceless, that we've been silenced on purpose, and we've been tricked to believe that our stories are worthless. I want to tell you that pain doesn't have to be stagnant. Our bodies, our blood remembers. Dene sutlene hesli. I want to tell you that tears will help us all heal. Let your eyes be the window between your hope and our fears, between the past and what's here. Your wisdom is a gift, and if the world fails to hear you, then demand we listen. Like a magnifying glass, amplify your insight. You don't have to be old to know what's right for your life. The world's dark and cold, and every fire needs a stone. Remember this if you ever forget your way back home. I want to tell you that you're worth everything you dream of, that you're worth every hug, that it's still safe to love. Your embrace may be lost, and your smile may be missing, but your imagination is still yours, so just find the stars and just keep on wishing, just keep on praying. We'll put our tobacco down and fingers crossed that we heal from this pain that all these strangers brought. And I'll stand with you and pray and struggle and bleed. They tried so hard to bury us, they didn't know that we are seeds. They tried to take our language, and here we speak peace.
Get the dumb scat NYO. Frantic struggle for ways of undoing while tightening the knots. Connecting the dots feels like Russian roulette. The more the picture forms, my heart gets heavier and heavier and heavier. It might just stop, bang, clocked. Always teetering in between worlds, white and Indian, sober, messed up, compassion, and don't give up. Repetition of patterns, hoping for different results. Signs and hope and madness, all leading to the one thing that we need, and that's a revolution. A revolution for nation-to-nation relationships. Control our systems, not control of our systems, not your systems, our systems. Are you listening? I come from the Cree, Nehiyawak people, different from nations east to west. Mi'kmaq, Six Nations, Anishinaabe over here, Haida, Squamish that way too, Blackfoot blood in the middle, just to name a few. And when I'm in their space, I am quiet. I respect. I mean, it's such a simple thing to be quiet, to respect. And the second I feel that sense of superiority, I self-check. I'm no better than the smallest crawler. I live and breathe from my son into my daughter, grounded AF. Just add water, dive deeper than that little animal, the muskrat. Been called lazy, drunk, slut, stealer, born into beliefs of 1,000-story weavers, not worthy of the good life, of place, of love, forced into my psyche like heaven above. Narratives interwoven intergenerations over time. The late great poet Zacchaeus Jackson dropped my truth with this line. He said, you run your race, while I fast and pray for mine. Well, I'll run my race fast and I'll pray for time to rebuild my strength and want to survive. Realize worth over systemic design. What's working for you, what's not working for me. What I wouldn't give to feel unhinged, free. But freedom is defined in different ways. Still imprisoned, walking downtown without chains. Envision my kids, proud of their Nehiyaw names. Heads held high, unfamiliar with shame. 150 years later, you don't need me to tell the story. It's up to you to smooth the jagged edges of your ancestry. Rethink what life looks nation to nation. Reconciliation truly means giving up that vacation. There's no healing when everything else stays the same. Let's build these bridges and start with the frame. Action and movement is what will really bring change. Action and movement is what will really bring change. Water.
Water. Water.
Water.
Water.
The world's water.
Water. Call all the world's water.
Water.
Water. All the world's water. Call all the world's water. I would call all the world's water.
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 Call all the world's
all
water.
the world's water.
Water. All the world's water.
Water. And I would call all the world's water. Traitor!
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 Traitor! Traitor! Brought the traders of fur, of flesh, of Black Hills gold. For the way her body brought the traders of fur, of flesh, of Black Hills gold, of Black Hills gold.
Her body, for the way
brought the traders of fur, of flesh.
Holding butterfly nets wove of heartstrings so cold that they were able to freeze.
And then capture my nation's breezes.
Kidnap the Blackfoot Nappy.
Whitewash replaced with a half-scalped, war-painted Jesus.
A strangled slit-throat Caesar.
Whitewash replaced.
Whitewash replaced.
Whitewash replaced.
Whitewash replaced.
Whitewash replaced.
Kidnap the Blackfoot Nappy. Whitewash replaced with a strangled slit-throat Caesar. A half-filled, war-painted Jesus. So unable to say the words et tu, Brute, he simply mouthed the letters
O and K.
And as today's stray bullets pull stars from the sky through bubble-wrapped newborn darkness, I see that midnight is them,
and the noon is me.
But now bright mind's lights have ruined the moon,
like the white's ruined wounded knee.
pruned our freedom.
Clip, snip, quick flip, bonsai treedom. They pruned our freedom.
Clip, snip, quick flip, bonsai treedom.
They pruned our freedom. Clip, snip, quick flip, bonsai treedom.
And now we are needed like weeds in the Garden of Eden.
But me, I never seen a field of dandelions trying to grow into roses.
God knows Columbus needed no Moses to split the sea of my red people.
He knew enough to just trust in the strength of the steeple.
The length and breadth of cathedrals.
God's gospel glass needles.
Force-feeding Kanata's pre-bleeding crimson Indian summer evenings.
Leaving me grieving that even as we speak our spoken words, these thieves are still weaving history through tree trunks.
Searching for reasons to clear-cut the psyche. And still we wonder at the marvels of our carven nation.
Segra,
Degra,
congregation,
and still the throngs they hasten
to sing songs of race and reformation,
once sung by the lungs of long-dead masons.
So if here's the place,
And now's the time,
you run your race,
while I fast and pray for mine,
and hunger for the day when I can release the images of my people,
Proud
and free from the
the
collective walls of imagination. But right now, North America's just a fucked up fancy restaurant. And I'm looking forward to the day
when I can't get a reservation.
My friend said, don't run. Where you're headed has already happened. If you go there without looking back, the same traps will snatch, the same blood will bleed again. My friend said, turn around. Having made a home of jail, having lost jobs and friends, sick in the arms of strangers because he could let go of loved ones but not a pipe, my friend took the worst of his life and weaved it into the rhymes that would bomb from his mouth and explode in the ears of students and send them flying back onto the right path. He said, every life lacks grace. The mistake is to pretend not to remember. To remember is not just to say, in our past they trained guns on kids, marched them from their homes, taught them to cheat their own tongues. A new nation shoved down their throat until every word they spoke was treason. To remember is to bring the full force of that fact alive. Let it thunder through our minds and make a mess. Define so starkly the distance between where we come from and what we pretend we are. The easy lies of history start to light us up like fireworks on a fake birthday in an occupied sky until that fire rocks us into something braver, till we stand before the vertigo of the mirror and acknowledge how little we still do to stop the bleeding, until we commit, finally, to actually being guests. Cross the threshold, take a seat, and listen long enough to the gnashing teeth of history to finally make out the melody of our mistakes, find the harmony, and do that hard work of playing our part so that the sound of so many nations forced into one stops being a howling and becomes a new song, strong enough to carry across a landscape of broken villages and be sung as a new adventure between neighbors. My friend said the sound of stolen land is silence. So he never shut up. Living microphone, tornado of language, bullhorn, fire alarm, drum. He's still with us in the wind when our pace picks up, reminding us not to run.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us at NYO Canada Replay. We've listened to some great music, had great conversations, and our babysitting time ran out. So before we go, I'd just like to say that even though this interview happened in virtual time and space, and so much of what we see and listen to is digital, let's just take a second to think about the ground that's been beneath our feet. We'd like to acknowledge and thank the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Wendat, for we are currently present in their ancestral lands. We'd also like to thank any other people or nations who have cared for this land, because care for the land is needed now more than ever. Our NYO community and its activities take place all over Canada. These lands are the traditional lands of many First Nations and are largely unceded. As guests, settlers, even colonizers, we need to educate ourselves about the complexities, injustices, and just the history that we share together. As with musical training that we practice, the learning and listening involved needs to be mindful and continuous. So let's work towards a future that respects the original caretakers of the land and the future generations who will inhabit it, walk on it, drink the water, and make music in it.